The Manhattan heat hung like a heavy curtain over the financial district, the late afternoon sun reflecting off glass skyscrapers in blinding flashes. Traffic had ground to its usual standstill, a symphony of impatient horns and rumbling engines. Inside their climate-controlled bubbles, executives checked emails, made calls, and tried to ignore the world outside their windows. Among the sea of vehicles, a small figure darted with practiced agility. 8-year-old Daisy Mitchell balanced a plastic bucket of wilting flowers against her hip, her eyes scanning for potential customers. The petals were already drooping, some stems leaking dirt, but she persisted with the determination of someone who had no choice. Her faded blue dress hung loose on her thin frame, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Between cars, she'd tap gently on windows, offering her flowers with a gap-toothed smile. "Would you like to buy a flower, sir?" Most people didn't even look up. At one of the busiest intersections, a black armored SUV stopped at the red light. The dark-tinted windows revealed nothing of the occupants, but Daisy's instincts, honed by necessity, told her expensive cars sometimes meant generous customers. She approached the driver's side first, tapping lightly, but received no acknowledgement. Undeterred, she circled to the passenger side and held a single rose directly up to the window. To her surprise, the window began to lower slowly. Inside sat Harrison Reed, CEO of Reed Innovations, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. At 45, he commanded respect in boardrooms and on Wall Street alike. His tailored suit, steel gray hair, and authoritative presence had been featured on the covers of business magazines under headlines like "The Future of American Enterprise." But at this moment, the powerful executive looked anything but composed. As his eyes fell on Daisy's face, his expression transformed from mild irritation to absolute shock. The smartphone slipped from his fingers onto the leather seat. His face drained of color, and his hand instinctively moved to his chest as if struggling to breathe. His gaze remained fixed on the child's face, taking in every feature with growing disbelief. It wasn't her shabby clothes or unwashed hair that held him transfixed. It was something far more profound. An unmistakable familiarity in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin, the set of her mouth. "Sir, just $5, Daisy said, misinterpreting his stare as interest in her flowers. "They're a little sad, but they still smell nice." The light turned green. The driver, sensing something was wrong, glanced at his employer. "Mr. Reed? We have the Johnson meeting in 15 minutes. Harrison didn't respond. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The car behind them honked impatiently. "Sir," the driver prompted again. "Go," Harrison finally whispered, his voice barely audible. As the SUV pulled away, Daisy remained on the corner, her flower still extended, confused by the strange encounter. Inside the vehicle, a tense silence filled the air. Mark Sullivan, Harrison's chief of staff, studied his boss with concern. "Harrison? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Harrison stared straight ahead, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up his phone. "Cancel everything," he said, his voice now firmer but hollow. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day." "The Johnson deal. We've been working on this for months. They flew in from—" "I said cancel everything," Harrison snapped, then immediately regained his composure. "I'm sorry, Mark. Something's come up. Something personal." Mark knew better than to push. In the 15 years he'd worked for Harrison Reed, he'd never seen him like this. The rest of the ride passed in silence, Harrison's mind racing with fragments of memories, calculations, possibilities. The image of the girl's face wouldn't leave him. Back at Reed Tower, Harrison locked himself in his private office, instructing his assistant to hold all calls and visitors. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, but he saw none of it. Instead, he paced like a caged animal, occasionally stopping to stare unseeing at the city below. "It can't be," he whispered to himself. "It simply can't be." But even as he denied it, he was already searching through his phone, scrolling through old contacts. Eventually, he moved to his computer, accessing archived emails from nearly a decade ago. There was something about that child's face that had struck him with the force of recognition, something he wouldn't dismiss as coincidence. Hours passed. The office grew dark as the sun set, but Harrison didn't notice. His desk became cluttered with old files, notes, and calendar printouts. He was searching for a name, a date, a clue to connect the dots that were forming an increasingly disturbing picture in his mind. Finally, around midnight, he found what he was looking for, a hotel receipt from a small establishment in upstate New York, dated 9 years ago, the Lakeside Inn, a weekend retreat where he'd stayed regularly during the expansion of their Syracuse facility. Where he'd met her, Rebecca Mitchell, the hotel's head housekeeper, attractive, intelligent, with a warmth that had drawn him in despite his usual caution. Their affair had lasted just over 2 months, discreet, uncomplicated. When the Syracuse project wrapped up, he returned to Manhattan and their relationship ended. Clean, simple, no strings attached. That had always been his policy. But now, as he stared at the receipt in his hand, Harrison Reed felt the foundations of his carefully constructed life beginning to crack. He pulled up the calendar on his computer. 9 years ago. The timing would be right. The girl looked about 8, and her face, that face that had shaken him to his core, was like looking in a mirror. Harrison rarely drank during the work week, but tonight he poured himself a generous scotch from the office bar. He stood at the window, glass in hand, watching the city lights below. Everything he had built, everything he had achieved, suddenly felt hollow. A growing certainty was taking shape in his mind, and with it came an unfamiliar feeling that took him a moment to identify. Shame. If he was right, and deep down he knew he was, he had unknowingly abandoned his own child to a life of poverty. A child who was now selling wilted flowers on street corners while he lived in luxury. The thought was unbearable. Harrison set down his glass with sudden resolve. He needed to know for sure. He needed to find that girl again. Tomorrow he would return to that same intersection. He would find her and her mother. He would discover the truth, whatever it might be. For the first time in years, Harrison Reed left the office without his briefcase or laptop. His mind was too full of questions that had nothing to do with business deals or profit margins. Questions about a little girl with familiar eyes and a faded blue dress. Questions about a past he thought he'd left behind. Questions about the kind of man he truly was. The next morning, Harrison arrived at the office earlier than usual. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night spent wrestling with possibilities and memories. His assistant, Claire, did a double take when she saw him wearing jeans and a casual button-down instead of his customary tailored suit. "Mr. Reed, is everything all right?" she asked, unable to hide her concern. "I'll be out of the office today, personal matter," he replied, avoiding her eyes as he collected a few items from his desk. "Reschedule anything that can't be handled by the team." Before she could ask further questions, he was gone, leaving behind a wake of confusion. Harrison's sleek Audi replaced yesterday's corporate SUV as he navigated toward the financial district. He parked several blocks away and walked, feeling strangely exposed without the buffer of drivers and assistants that typically surrounded him. The morning rush was in full swing. Crowds of professionals hurrying to offices, street vendors setting up carts, delivery trucks double-parked along curbs. Harrison positioned himself at a coffee shop with a clear view of yesterday's intersection, ordered a black coffee he didn't touch, and waited. Hours passed. The morning crowd thinned as lunchtime approached. Harrison remained, watching every passerby, scanning for a small figure with a bucket of flowers. Just as doubt began to creep in, he spotted her. Daisy appeared around the corner, looking even more fragile in daylight. Her clothes were different but equally worn, faded jeans and a pink t-shirt that had seen better days. The same plastic bucket hung from her arm, filled with fresh but inexpensive flowers. Harrison's heart raced as he left money on the table and stepped outside. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. When she noticed him, recognition flickered across her face. "You're the man from the big black car," she said, tilting her head. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. The same hazel eyes that stared back at him from his own mirror every morning, the same slight dimple in the left cheek when she offered a tentative smile. "Yes," Harrison managed, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I'd like to buy a flower today." Daisy brightened. "They're fresher today. $5 each or 3 for $12. He pulled out his wallet and handed her a $20 bill. "Keep the change," he said, accepting a single rose. Then, forcing casualness into his voice, he asked, "Do you sell flowers here every day?" "Most days. Sometimes I help Mom at the diner when she's not feeling good." She pointed across the street to a weathered establishment with a neon sign reading, "Blue Plate Diner." "Your mum works there." Harrison's gaze followed her gesture, his pulse quickening. "She washes dishes and helps the cook. She used to be a maid at a fancy hotel, but that was before." Before what, Daisy didn't say, but Harrison felt the weight of those unspoken years. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Daisy. Daisy Mitchell." Mitchell. The confirmation sent a jolt through him. "And your mum's name?" "Rebecca, but everyone calls her Becky." Each word confirmed what he already knew. Harrison looked at the diner, suddenly uncertain. He'd come for answers, but now that they were within reach, he hesitated. What right did he have to disrupt their lives? What would he even say? As if sensing his thoughts, Daisy added, "Mum's on break soon. She always comes out back for 15 minutes at 2 o'clock. Says she needs fresh air after being in the kitchen all morning." Harrison checked his watch. 1:47 p.m. "Thank you, Daisy," he said. Then, on impulse, added, "Do you like school?" She shrugged. "It's okay. I'm good at math. Mum says I get that from my dad. But I never met him." The innocent statement landed like a physical blow. Harrison swallowed hard. "I'm sure he would be proud of you." Daisy smiled, revealing the gap in her front teeth. "Maybe. Mom says he was real smart and worked with computers. I have a computer class at school now." Harrison nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He watched as Daisy approached another pedestrian, then made his way toward the back of the diner. A narrow alley ran behind the building, featuring a metal door that presumably led to the kitchen and a stack of empty crates that formed a makeshift seat. Harrison positioned himself at the alley's entrance, partially hidden by a dumpster. At precisely 2 o'clock, the door swung open. A woman emerged, unwrapping a sandwich from wax paper. She wore a food-stained apron over jeans and a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Despite the years and evident hardship, Harrison recognized her instantly. Rebecca Mitchell had aged, but gracefully. Fine lines around her eyes spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure. She looked thinner than he remembered, more weathered, but there was still a quiet dignity in her posture as she sat on the crates and tilted her face toward the sun. Harrison stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. Rebecca. She turned at the sound of her name, sandwich forgotten in her hand. The color drained from her face as recognition dawned. For a long moment she stared at him in stunned silence. "Harrison," she finally whispered, the name clearly foreign on her lips after so many years. "What are you? How did you?" She stopped, shaking her head as if to clear it. "You shouldn't be here." "I saw her yesterday," Harrison said simply. "Daisy. I was in my car and she was selling flowers." Understanding flooded Rebecca's expression, followed quickly by wariness. "So now you know." It wasn't a question. "Why didn't you tell me?" Harrison asked, his voice low but intense. "You think I didn't try?" Bitterness edged her words. "I called your office a dozen times when I found out I was pregnant. Your assistant said you were unavailable. I left messages, I sent emails, nothing." Harrison closed his eyes briefly, remembering his policy back then. Any contact from brief romantic entanglements was automatically filtered out. He'd instructed his staff to handle such matters, which typically meant polite dismissal and, if necessary, generous payments accompanied by confidentiality agreements. "I never knew," he said, though it felt like a hollow excuse. "You never wanted to know," Rebecca corrected, standing up. "Your life was too important, too busy for complications. I was just the housekeeper you slept with when you were bored in Syracuse." The brutal truth of her assessment stung. "That's not fair," he protested weakly. "Isn't it?" Her laugh was short and humorless. "After a month of trying to reach you, I got the message. Some lawyer from your company called, assumed I was after money, and offered a settlement if I'd sign some papers and go away quietly. I hung up on him." Harrison winced. Standard procedure for his legal team, dealing with what they categorized as potential liabilities. "I had no idea you were pregnant. Would it have mattered if you did?" The question hung between them, unanswered. Rebecca shook her head and checked her watch. "My break's almost over, I need to get back." "Wait," Harrison stepped forward as she turned toward the door. "I want to help. I want to be part of her life." Rebecca's expression hardened. "After 8 years, she doesn't even know you exist, Harrison. We've managed just fine without you." "Have you?" he challenged, gesturing to their surroundings. "She's selling flowers on street corners instead of being in school. You're washing dishes despite having a business degree." Her eyes widened in surprise that he remembered that detail. "We have enough. It's not the life you're used to, but it's ours." She paused, studying him. "Why now, Harrison? What do you really want?" "I want to know my daughter," he said, the word daughter still strange on his tongue. "I want to make things right. Things can't be made right with a checkbook. Daisy isn't some business problem you can solve. I know that, but I can't unknow what I know now. I can't just walk away." The door to the kitchen opened, and a heavy-set cook poked his head out. "Becky, order up, we're swamped." Rebecca nodded to her colleague before turning back to Harrison. "I get off at 8. Meet me at Riverside Park, near the playground at 78th. Daisy will be with the after-school program until I pick her up at 9. Without waiting for his response, she disappeared into the diner, leaving Harrison alone in the alley with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future pressing down on him. He walked back to the main street in a daze, barely noticing the bustling city around him. Near the corner where he'd first seen Daisy, his phone rang. It was Mark, his chief of staff, with updates on the Johnson deal and other pressing matters. For the first time in his career, Harrison found himself utterly disinterested in business concerns. "Handle it," he said simply, and hung up. He had 8 hours until his meeting with Rebecca. 8 hours to figure out what came next. 8 hours to prepare for a conversation that could change everything. What do you say to the woman you abandoned without knowing? What do you say about the daughter you never knew you had? As he walked back to his car, Harrison passed Daisy again. She waved cheerfully, recognizing her generous customer. He waved back, the simple gesture feeling both foreign and profound. That small hand, those familiar eyes, they belonged to his child, his daughter. The reality of it squeezed his chest like a vice. Riverside Park was eerily quiet that evening, the playground equipment casting long shadows in the fading light. Harrison arrived 30 minutes early, parking his Audi several blocks away and walking the remainder. He felt oddly self-conscious in this neighborhood, so different from the polished Upper East Side where he lived. He chose a bench with a clear view of the playground and waited, rehearsing opening lines that all seemed inadequate for the conversation ahead. At precisely 8 o'clock, Rebecca appeared, still wearing her work clothes but without the apron. Her hair was down now, falling past her shoulders in dark waves. She walked with purpose, scanning the area until she spotted him. Harrison stood as she approached, noticing the wariness in her posture. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said when she reached him. "I considered not showing up," she admitted, keeping a careful distance between them. "But we need to talk about this properly, away from the diner." They sat on opposite ends of the bench, the space between them laden with unspoken history. For a moment, neither spoke. The distant sounds of traffic and city life filled the silence. "I checked my records after seeing you," Harrison finally said. 9 years ago when you tried to contact me. I was in the middle of our company's first major acquisition. I had delegated all personal communications to my staff. They were instructed to filter out distractions." Rebecca's expression remained impassive. "Is that what I was? A distraction?" "No," Harrison sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's not what I meant. I had compartmentalized my life. Business was everything. Personal entanglements were secondary." "Entanglements," she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "That's one way to describe creating a child." Harrison winced. "I'm not handling this well, I'm sorry." To his surprise, Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "You always did struggle with emotions. Some things don't change." The observation, so casual yet intimate, struck him. She had known him, really known him during those brief months, not as the business titan or the public figure, but as the man beneath the persona. "Tell me about her," Harrison said, redirecting the conversation to safer ground. "About Daisy." Something in Rebecca's eyes shifted, warmed. "She's brilliant. Reads above her grade level. Loves math and science. Stubborn to a fault." A smile touched her lips. "She gets that from both of us, I suppose." "She has my eyes," Harrison said quietly. "And my mother's smile." Rebecca nodded. "I noticed that from the first. It was difficult seeing those reminders every day." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "She asks about you sometimes. Not by name, of course, just about her father. Why he isn't around, why other kids have dads and she doesn't. The words landed like physical blows. What do you tell her? The truth, mostly. That you worked with computers, that you were smart and ambitious, that sometimes grown-ups don't stay together, but it doesn't mean they don't care about their children. She looked away. I never told her you didn't know about her. I didn't want her to feel unwanted. Thank you for that, Harrison said, genuinely moved by this unexpected kindness. But she deserves to know the whole truth someday. And what is the whole truth, Harrison? That you're suddenly interested in being a father after 8 years. For how long until the novelty wears off? Until it interferes with some business deal? The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. I don't know what kind of father I'll be, he admitted. I never planned on having children. But I can't walk away now that I know. I won't. Rebecca studied him, searching for something in his expression. What exactly are you proposing? I want to help financially, of course. But it's more than that. I want to be part of her life, to know her, for her to know me. And how do you envision that working? You show up in your designer suits and expensive car, take her to fancy restaurants, buy her things we could never afford, then drop her back in our reality. Do you have any idea how confusing that would be for an 8-year-old? Harrison hadn't considered this. In his world, problems had clear solutions. This was messier, more complicated. I don't have all the answers yet, but I'm willing to figure it out, to do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, Rebecca repeated skeptically, even if it means adapting to our world instead of expecting us to adapt to yours. The question caught him off guard. In his mind, he'd been imagining elevating their standard of living, moving them to a better neighborhood, providing Daisy with the best education money could buy. It hadn't occurred to him that Rebecca might resist such changes. I just want what's best for her, he said carefully, and you assume that means what money can buy. Private schools, designer clothes. Summer camps in Europe, Rebecca shook her head. Those things aren't bad, Harrison, but they're not what make a childhood happy or complete. Daisy needs stability, consistency. She needs to know the people in her life won't disappear when things get difficult. The implications stung, but Harrison recognized the truth in her words. His own childhood had been materially abundant, but emotionally barren. His parents had delegated parenting to nannies and boarding schools, prioritizing career advancement over family dinners and bedtime stories. It was a pattern he'd unconsciously planned to repeat. You're right, he conceded. I don't know the first thing about being a parent, but I want to learn. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Rebecca's expression softened. It won't be easy. For any of us. When can I meet her? Properly, I mean. That's complicated, Rebecca sighed. We can't just spring this on her. She's only 8. Finding out her father has suddenly appeared after being absent her entire life. It needs to be handled delicately. Harrison nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her caution. How do you suggest we proceed? Slowly, Rebecca emphasized. You could start by becoming a familiar face. Come to the diner regularly. Talk to her when she's selling her flowers. Let her get comfortable with you as a person before we introduce the idea that you're her father. It wasn't the immediate solution Harrison had hoped for, but he understood the reasoning. I can do that. But eventually, we tell her the truth. Eventually, Rebecca agreed. When the time is right. She checked her watch. I need to pick her up soon. As she stood to leave, Harrison remained seated, struggling with a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Rebecca, he began hesitantly, these past 8 years, has there been anyone else? In your life, I mean. The question clearly surprised her. Are you asking if I've dated? When he nodded, she laughed softly. Harrison, I work 60 hours a week at a diner. I'm raising a daughter alone. I take online classes at night trying to finish the business degree I put on hold when Daisy was born. When exactly would I have time to date? The reality of her life, laid out so plainly, filled Harrison with a profound sense of guilt. While he'd been building his empire, attending galas, and living in luxury, she'd been struggling just to keep their daughter fed and clothed. I'm sorry, he said, the words entirely inadequate, for all of it. Rebecca's expression was unreadable. Don't be sorry. Be present. That's what Daisy needs now. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Harrison alone with his thoughts as darkness settled over the park. The following weeks established a new rhythm to Harrison's life. Every morning he arrived at his office early, powering through work with unprecedented efficiency. By early afternoon he would disappear, changing from his business attire into more casual clothes. His executive team noticed the shift, but knew better than to question it. Only Mark Sullivan, his closest confidant, dared to broach the subject. "Whatever's going on with you," he remarked one morning, "it seems to be working. I've never seen you this focused." Harrison offered no explanation, but Mark wasn't blind. He'd noticed the receipts from the Blue Plate diner appearing regularly on Harrison's expense reports. He'd observed the changes in his friend's schedule, the new priority given to previously immovable meetings. Something had fundamentally shifted in Harrison Reed's carefully ordered world. At the diner, Harrison became a regular, always sitting at the same corner booth with a laptop nursing a coffee for hours. The staff grew accustomed to his presence, though speculation ran rampant about why a man who was clearly wealthy spent so much time in their modest establishment. Only the manager knew the truth, having been taken into Rebecca's confidence. Harrison timed his visits to coincide with Daisy's after-school appearances. The girl would burst through the back door, immediately searching for her mother, then settle at the counter with homework while waiting for Rebecca's shift to end. Gradually, carefully, Harrison began to engage her in conversation. "That looks like multiplication," he commented one afternoon, nodding at her math worksheet. Daisy looked up, recognizing him from their flower transactions. "It's easy," she said with childish confidence. "I'm the fastest in my class." "I always liked math too," Harrison replied, maintaining a casual tone despite his racing heart. "It makes sense, you know. There's always a right answer." Daisy nodded solemnly. "Exactly, not like spelling. Words are tricky." These brief exchanges expanded over time. Harrison discovered Daisy's love for space and astronomy, her difficulty with spelling, her dream of one day becoming a scientist who discovers important things. Each revelation was a gift, a puzzle piece in the portrait of his daughter. From across the diner, Rebecca watched these interactions with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. Seeing them together, Harrison's gentle patience, Daisy's growing comfort with him, stirred something profound and complicated in her heart. One evening, after Daisy had gone to bed in their small apartment above a laundromat, Rebecca called the number Harrison had given her. "She asked about you today," she said without preamble when he answered. "She wanted to know why the nice computer man comes to the diner so often." Harrison's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "That you're working on an important project, and our diner has the best coffee in Manhattan." She paused. "She likes you, Harrison. She says you explain math better than her teacher." Pride swelled in his chest at this simple praise. "She's incredible, Rebecca. So smart, so perceptive." "Yes, she is." Another pause. "I think it's time we move to the next step, if you're still certain about this." "I am," Harrison replied without hesitation. "What did you have in mind?" "This Sunday. Daisy and I usually go to Central Park if the weather's nice. You could join us, not as her father yet, but as a friend, someone I know from before she was born." It was a small step, but significant. "I'll be there," Harrison promised. After they hung up, he stood at the window of his penthouse, looking out over the glittering city. For the first time in his adult life, Harrison Reed felt genuinely afraid, not of business rivals or market downturns, but of something far more consequential, the possibility of failing his daughter, of not being the father she deserved, of causing more harm than good by entering her life. Yet alongside the fear was something else, something unfamiliar and warming. Hope. Hope that perhaps it wasn't too late to become the man he should have been all along. Sunday arrived with perfect early summer weather, the kind that drew New Yorkers outdoors in droves. Central Park hummed with activity, joggers on the paths, families on picnic blankets, street performers entertaining gathered crowds. Harrison arrived 15 minutes early, having spent an absurd amount of time that morning deciding what to wear. His usual designer wardrobe seemed inappropriate, but the jeans and casual shirts he'd recently purchased still felt like a costume. He'd settled on khakis and a blue button-down, casual enough for the park but still within his comfort zone. He spotted them near the Bethesda fountain, Rebecca in a simple sundress, Daisy in shorts and a t-shirt featuring the solar system, her dark hair in pigtails. She was feeding pigeons, laughing as they fluttered around her. The sight made his throat tighten. Rebecca noticed him first, raising a hand in greeting. When Daisy followed her mother's gaze, her face lit up with recognition. "Mr. Computer Man," she called out, waving enthusiastically. Harrison couldn't help smiling as he approached. "Hello, Daisy. Fancy meeting you without your flowers today." "It's my day off," she informed him seriously. "Everyone needs a day off, even flower sellers." "Very wise," Harrison agreed, then turned to Rebecca. "Thanks for the invitation." Rebecca nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Daisy, remember I told you about my friend Harrison, from before you were born?" The girl studied him with new interest. "You knew my mom a long time ago?" "Yes," Harrison replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "We were friends in Syracuse. I was working on a project there." "That's where I was born," Daisy exclaimed. "But we moved here when I was a baby." The three settled on a bench, Daisy between them, as she continued to scatter breadcrumbs for the birds. The conversation flowed more easily than Harrison had expected, with Daisy's natural curiosity driving much of it. She wanted to know what kind of computers he worked with, whether he liked ice cream. Chocolate was the correct answer, she informed him, and if he'd ever seen a real rocket launch. "Not yet," he admitted, "but I've always wanted to. Mom says we'll go to Florida someday to see one. Right, Mom?" Rebecca smiled, though Harrison caught the flicker of sadness in her eyes. "Someday, sweetheart." Harrison recognized the promise for what it was, the kind parents make knowing fulfillment might never be possible. An idea formed in his mind, but he held it back for later. After feeding the birds, they walked to a nearby playground where Daisy raced to join other children on the equipment. From a bench, Harrison and Rebecca watched her navigate the jungle gym with confidence. "She's fearless," Harrison observed. "Always has been," Rebecca replied. "Sometimes it terrifies me." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Harrison spoke again. "Thank you for today, for letting me be part of this." Rebecca nodded, her eyes still on Daisy. "It's going well, but this is the easy part. She's used to meeting new people, making connections. The hard part comes later. When we tell her who I really am," Harrison acknowledged. "Yes, and when we figure out what that means going forward." She turned to face him directly. "I need to know what you're envisioning, Harrison. What kind of relationship are you hoping to build with her? Weekend visits, holidays, or something more?" The question deserved a thoughtful answer. "Ideally, I'd want to be a regular part of her life, not just special occasions or scheduled visits, but involved, present for school events, helping with homework, teaching her things." He hesitated. "I know that's complicated given our circumstances." "Our circumstances," Rebecca repeated, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "You mean the fact that you live in a penthouse overlooking the park while we share a one-bedroom walk-up above a laundromat? That I work 60-hour weeks while you run a billion-dollar company? Those circumstances?" Harrison winced. "I want to help change those circumstances, Rebecca. Let me provide financial support at least, for Daisy's sake." "And then what? You think money solves everything?" Her voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing to ensure Daisy was still out of earshot. "It doesn't solve everything, but it solves some things," Harrison countered. "It could mean better schools for Daisy, a safer neighborhood, you finishing your degree without working yourself to exhaustion." Rebecca's expression remained guarded. "And what happens when your board of directors or shareholders discover you have an illegitimate child with a diner waitress? What happens when the press gets hold of the story? Have you thought about that?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't considered the public relations aspect of the situation. In the insular world of high finance and tech entrepreneurship, appearance and reputation were powerful currencies. An unexpected child from a past relationship could be spun multiple ways by the media, none of them particularly flattering. "I don't care what they think," he said finally, though even to his own ears the declaration lacked conviction. Rebecca gave him a knowing look. "You've spent your entire adult life caring what they think, Harrison. Your image is part of your brand. Don't pretend this won't complicate things for you professionally." She was right, and they both knew it. His company was planning to go public within the year. Investors were already nervous about market conditions. A personal scandal could impact the IPO significantly. "It doesn't matter," he insisted, more firmly this time. "Daisy is more important than any of that." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "I believe you mean that right now. But when reality sets in, when your advisors are warning you about shareholder confidence and your lawyers are drawing up custody agreements designed to minimize your exposure, Will you still feel the same way? Before Harrison could respond, Daisy came running over, cheeks flushed from exertion. Mom, Harrison, did you see me go across the monkey bars? All by myself. We sure did. Rebecca's demeanor transformed instantly, all tension vanishing as she focused on her daughter. You're getting so strong. Like Wonder Woman, Daisy agreed, flexing her small arms. She turned to Harrison. Do you want to push me on the swings? The simple request filled him with disproportionate joy. I'd love to. As they walked to the swings, Daisy slipped her hand into his naturally, the small gesture nearly stopping Harrison in his tracks. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his with complete trust, unaware of the significance the moment held for him. It was the first time he'd held his daughter's hand. For the next hour, adult concerns faded as Harrison pushed Daisy on the swings, helped her balance on the seesaw, and listened to her elaborate explanations of her playground strategies. When it was time to leave, he felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Can Harrison come for ice cream too? Daisy asked as they prepared to depart. Rebecca hesitated, looking to Harrison with a question in her eyes. I'd like that, he said, if it's okay with your mom. Rebecca nodded, though Harrison sensed her reservations. They walked to a nearby ice cream parlor, where Daisy ordered a chocolate cone with rainbow sprinkles, carefully supervising the server to ensure adequate sprinkle coverage. As they sat at a small table outside, Daisy chattering about school and friends, Harrison was struck by how natural it felt, this simple family outing that represented everything his life had been missing. When they finished, Harrison walked them to the subway station. Daisy gave him an impulsive hug goodbye, ice cream sticky on her face. You should come to the park with us again, she declared. Next Sunday we're going to the zoo. That sounds wonderful, Harrison replied, looking to Rebecca for confirmation. She nodded slightly. We should go, she said to Daisy. We need to stop at the grocery store before it closes. Harrison watched them disappear down the subway stairs, feeling oddly bereft. He could have offered his driver, sent them home in comfort rather than on the crowded subway. He could have had groceries delivered to their apartment, sparing Rebecca the errand. But he understood her boundaries, her determination to maintain independence. Back in his penthouse that evening, Harrison felt the contrast between their worlds more acutely than ever. While Rebecca was likely preparing a simple dinner in their small kitchen, he stood in a space larger than their entire apartment, designed by one of New York's most exclusive interior decorators. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could buy anything he wanted except the thing that mattered most: simple acceptance as Daisy's father. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his lawyer, Jacob Stern, calling about IPO preparations. We need to complete the personal disclosure forms this week, Jacob reminded him. Anything that could potentially impact investor confidence needs to be disclosed to the SEC. Family matters, past relationships, pending litigation, all of it. Harrison hesitated. Actually, Jacob, there's something we need to discuss. Something that's recently come to my attention. Please tell me you haven't been insider trading, Jacob joked. When Harrison didn't laugh, his tone shifted to concern. What is it, Harrison? I have a daughter, he said simply. She's 8 years old. I only discovered her existence 2 weeks ago. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. I see, Jacob finally responded, his lawyer's training evident in his measured tone. And the mother? We had a brief relationship 9 years ago. She tried to contact me when she discovered she was pregnant, but my staff intercepted those attempts. Another lengthy pause. This complicates things, Harrison. The timing couldn't be worse with the IPO approaching. I'm aware of that. Have you established paternity legally? Made any financial arrangements? Is the mother seeking compensation or planning to go public with this? The barrage of questions, so clinically detached, suddenly repulsed Harrison. Her name is Daisy, he said sharply. She's not a potential liability or a PR problem. She's my daughter. Jacob backpedaled immediately. Of course I apologize. I'm just trying to understand the situation so we can address it appropriately. There's nothing to address, Harrison replied. I'm going to be part of her life. How that happens is between her mother and me. The company, the IPO, all of it comes second. Harrison, be reasonable. We've worked toward this IPO for years. Your personal feelings aside, you have responsibilities to your employees, your investors. I'll call you tomorrow, Jacob, Harrison interrupted. ending the call before his lawyer could continue. He stood at his window, looking out over the city lights, the conversation with Jacob having crystallized something in his mind. For his entire adult life, he'd prioritized business success above all else. Personal relationships, family connections, emotional fulfillment, all had been secondary considerations, sacrificed on the altar of professional achievement. Now, for the first time, those priorities were shifting, and the sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. His phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "Daisy had a great time today. She asked if you're coming to her school play next Friday. It's at 2 p.m. No pressure." Harrison smiled, already mentally rearranging his schedule. No investor meeting or board presentation could possibly be more important than watching Daisy in her school play. The realization was as simple as it was profound. His world was changing, whether he was ready or not. Over the following months, Harrison's presence in Daisy's life grew steadily more consistent. The school play, where she performed as a particularly enthusiastic Saturn in the solar system, marked the first of many milestones he was privileged to witness. He attended parent-teacher conferences alongside Rebecca, sat through Saturday morning cartoon marathons, and learned the names of every stuffed animal in Daisy's extensive collection. The transition wasn't without challenges. Harrison struggled to navigate the unfamiliar terrain of childhood needs and expectations. Rebecca maintained careful boundaries, watching his involvement with cautious optimism. And Daisy, perceptive beyond her years, began asking increasingly pointed questions about why her mother's old friend had suddenly become such a fixture in their lives. The inevitable conversation could no longer be postponed. They chose a quiet Sunday afternoon in Central Park, Daisy's favorite place. As they sat on a blanket beneath a sprawling oak, Rebecca gently took her daughter's hand. "Daisy, sweetheart, we need to tell you something important." The girl looked between them, her expression curious but untroubled. "Is it about why Harrison comes to all my school stuff now? Melissa says he's like your boyfriend, but I told her that's silly because you don't kiss or anything." Rebecca smiled despite her nervousness. "No, honey. Harrison isn't my boyfriend. She glanced at Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. "He's your father." Daisy's eyes widened, darting between them with newfound intensity. "My father? Like my real father?" "Yes," Harrison confirmed, his voice soft but steady. "I didn't know about you until I saw you selling flowers that day. If I had known, I would have been part of your life from the beginning." Daisy processed this information with remarkable composure, her analytical mind working through the implications. "Is that why I have your eyes?" "Ms. Wilson says I have unusual eyes, not brown like Mom's." "That's right," Harrison smiled. "You have my eyes, and my mother's smile." Daisy considered this new revelation, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Why didn't you know about me?" The question hung in the air, weighted with complexity. Rebecca and Harrison had agreed beforehand to offer a simplified version of the truth, appropriate for an 8-year-old's understanding. "When your mom and I knew each other, it was just for a short time," Harrison explained carefully. "I had to move back to Manhattan for work before she discovered she was going to have you. She tried to tell me, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." "I didn't get her messages." Daisy nodded slowly, processing this explanation. "So you didn't leave on purpose? You just didn't know?" "That's right," Harrison confirmed, relieved by her understanding. "If I had known about you, I would have been there." Daisy turned to her mother. "Is that why we never had enough money? Because he didn't know he was supposed to help?" The innocent question landed like a blow. Rebecca flinched slightly, while Harrison felt the familiar weight of guilt pressing against his chest. "We've always had everything we needed," Rebecca said firmly. "I made sure of that. But now I can help," Harrison added gently. "If that's okay with both of you." Daisy considered this for a moment, then asked the question that had been forming in her mind. "Does this mean I have to live with you sometimes? Like Melissa does with her dad on weekends?" Harrison glanced at Rebecca, unsure how to answer. They hadn't discussed formal custody arrangements, both preferring to let their relationship develop naturally before involving lawyers and legal documents. "We're still figuring out exactly how everything will work," Rebecca explained. "But Harrison will definitely be spending more time with us. And maybe sometimes you'll visit his home too." "Do you have a swimming pool?" Daisy asked Harrison, her priorities suddenly shifting in the mercurial way of children. Harrison laughed, tension breaking. No swimming pool, but there's a rooftop garden with a great view of the city. Cool, Daisy said simply. Then, with the directness that only children can manage, she asked, "Can I call you Dad? Or do I have to call you Harrison still?" The question caught him off guard, emotion welling unexpectedly. "I would like that very much," he managed to say. "If you want to." Daisy nodded decisively. "Okay, Dad." Just like that, with two simple words, Harrison's world tilted on its axis. For the rest of the afternoon, Daisy peppered him with questions about his life, his family. Whether he had pets, he didn't, but was suddenly considering the possibility. And if he knew how to play chess, he did and promised to teach her. By the time they parted, the new reality had been established with the remarkable adaptability of childhood. Later that evening, after Daisy had gone to bed, Rebecca invited Harrison to stay for coffee in their small apartment. It was the first time he'd been inside their home, a space that revealed much about their lives together. Though modestly furnished, it was immaculately kept, with Daisy's artwork covering the refrigerator and bookshelves overflowing with children's literature. Harrison noticed Rebecca's textbooks stacked neatly on a small desk in the corner. "Business administration?" he asked, indicating the books. She nodded. "3 more classes until I finish my degree. It's taken me 9 years, but I'm almost there." "That's impressive," Harrison said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Working full-time, raising Daisy alone, and still completing your education." Rebecca shrugged, but he could see she was pleased by the recognition. "It's important that Daisy sees me finishing what I started. I want her to understand that education matters, that perseverance pays off." She handed him a mug of coffee and sat across from him at the small kitchen table. "She took the news well," she observed. "Better than I expected," Harrison agreed. "She's remarkably resilient." "She's had to be." The words weren't accusatory, just a simple acknowledgement of their reality. Harrison nodded, understanding the subtle reminder of all he'd missed. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about ways I can support you both that respect your independence." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, skeptical but listening. "I know you're concerned about me trying to buy my way into Daisy's life, and you're right to be cautious, but there are some things I'd like to provide if you'll allow it. Such as a college fund for Daisy, for starters. And I'd like to pay off your student loans." When Rebecca began to protest, he continued quickly. "Not as charity, Rebecca, as my responsibility. I should have been contributing all these years." Rebecca studied him, weighing his words. "What else?" "I've been looking at apartments in this neighborhood, 3 bedrooms, good light, close to Daisy's school. Something that would give you both more space but keep you in the community, you know. The deed would be in your name." He hesitated before adding, "And I've been speaking with my HR director about a potential position in our community outreach division that might interest you once you complete your degree." Rebecca's expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. "You've been busy." "I've been trying to find solutions that make sense," Harrison corrected. "Ones that don't disrupt the life you've built, but make things easier going forward." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, turning her coffee mug in her hands. "You've changed," she finally said. "The Harrison I knew wouldn't have considered what we needed beyond the financial. He would have tried to solve everything with money and legal arrangements." "I'm learning," Harrison admitted. "I'm trying to understand what's actually important here. It's not about checking boxes or fulfilling obligations. It's about being present, building relationships, being the father Daisy deserves and the co-parent you deserve." The term co-parent hung between them, new but fitting. "There's something else I've been working on," Harrison continued. "Something I'd like your input on before I move forward." He opened his laptop and pulled up a presentation. "It's a new initiative I'm proposing to my board. A social enterprise focused on providing employment and entrepreneurship opportunities for single parents, particularly mothers." Rebecca moved her chair closer to see the screen, professional interest overriding personal caution. Harrison explained the concept: a network of businesses that would provide flexible employment, childcare support, educational advancement, and eventually, partnership opportunities for participants. "The flagship would be a floral design and event decoration business," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "Employing women with artistic talent but limited professional opportunities. providing training, mentorship, and eventual profit sharing. Rebecca studied the business plan with growing interest. This is actually impressive. The financial projections are realistic. The growth model is sustainable. She looked up at him. Why flowers? Harrison smiled softly. They seemed fitting. If Daisy hadn't been selling those flowers that day, we might never have found each other. Recognition dawned in Rebecca's eyes. This isn't just about us, is it? You're genuinely trying to create something that could help others in similar situations. I've been fortunate in business, Harrison said simply. But meeting Daisy, seeing how you've struggled despite doing everything right, it's changed my perspective. There are thousands of single parents out there working multiple jobs, sacrificing everything for their children. They deserve better options. Rebecca was silent for a moment, visibly moved by the unexpected depth of his vision. I could help with this, she finally said. Not just as an employee, but in developing the model. I know what would have made a difference for me over the years, what would have helped other mothers I've known. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, Harrison admitted. This needs to be shaped by people with lived experience, not just business theory. As they spent the next hour discussing the initiative, refining concepts and identifying potential challenges, Harrison realized they were building something unexpected, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. It wasn't the conventional family reunion he might have imagined, but perhaps it was something better, something authentic and meaningful that honored their complex history while creating a new path forward. 6 months later, a small storefront opened in a revitalized section of the Bronx. Its elegant sign read simply Daisy's Blooms, with the tagline Flowers for Life's Moments. Inside, a team of women, all single mothers, created arrangements for everything from corporate events to weddings to everyday celebrations. The business model was innovative: flexible hours, on-site childcare, educational support, and a clear path to partial ownership for long-term employees. The grand opening attracted modest media attention, with several business publications noting the social enterprise aspect. What went unreported was the personal story behind the venture, how a chance encounter between a wealthy CEO and a child selling wilted flowers had blossomed into something transformative for all involved. Behind the scenes, other changes had taken place. Rebecca and Daisy had moved into a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment in their neighborhood. Rebecca had completed her degree and now divided her time between managing Daisy's Blooms and consulting on the expansion of the model to other communities. Harrison had rearranged his professional life, delegating more responsibility to his executive team to ensure he never missed Daisy's school events or their Sunday outings. The Reed Innovations IPO had proceeded successfully, though with slightly less fanfare than originally planned. Harrison had insisted on full transparency regarding his newly discovered daughter, preparing investors for potential media interest in his personal life. To his surprise, the story had generated more positive interest than negative, with several business publications praising his commitment to responsible fatherhood and social innovation. On a warm Sunday afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after their first meeting, Harrison, Rebecca, and Daisy walked together through Central Park. Daisy skipped ahead, occasionally turning to make sure they were following. "She has a dance recital next month," Rebecca mentioned. "She's been practicing every night." "I've already cleared my calendar," Harrison assured her. "The Tokyo investors will have to wait." Rebecca smiled, noting how naturally such priorities now came to him. "She asked me yesterday if we were ever going to get married," she said casually. Harrison nearly tripped over his own feet. What did you tell her?" "That grown-up relationships are complicated, that we're still getting to know each other again, that some families don't follow traditional patterns." She glanced at him. "Was that okay?" "Yes," Harrison nodded, collecting himself. "That was perfect." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before he added, "Though I wouldn't rule out the possibility entirely. Someday." Rebecca raised an eyebrow but didn't dismiss the idea. Someday is a good word. It leaves room for evolution. Ahead of them, Daisy had stopped to examine something on the ground. As they caught up, she proudly displayed her discovery, a dandelion gone to seed, its delicate white puffs intact despite the breeze. "Make a wish before you blow it," she instructed, offering it to Harrison. He accepted the humble weed that most would consider worthless, seeing it instead through his daughter's eyes as something magical, full of potential. "What should I wish for?" he asked. Daisy shook her head solemnly. "You can't tell, or it won't come true. That's the rule." Harrison nodded with equal seriousness, closed his eyes briefly, then blew gently. The tiny seedlings caught the sunlight as they dispersed on the wind, each carrying a fragment of possibility into the world. Daisy clapped with delight, then slipped her small hand into his. With her other hand, she reached for Rebecca, connecting them all in a simple human chain. "Now we're all together," she declared with satisfaction. As they continued their walk, Harrison reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year, how a single moment, a child's face glimpsed through a car window, had altered the course of multiple lives, how recognition had led to reconciliation and reconciliation to renewal, and how sometimes the most precious things in life weren't what you acquired, but what you discovered had been yours all along. "Dad," Daisy said, tugging at his hand, "are you listening? I asked if we could get ice cream." "Sorry, sweetheart." He smiled down at her. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am to have found you." Daisy rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair only children can master. "You didn't find me. I found you, remember? With my flowers." Harrison exchanged a glance with Rebecca over their daughter's head, both acknowledging the profound truth in the child's simple statement. "You're right," he agreed, squeezing Daisy's hand gently. "You found me, and I'm grateful every day that you did." At the small ice cream stand, as Daisy deliberated between chocolate and strawberry with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice, Harrison caught Rebecca watching him with a soft expression he couldn't quite interpret. "What?" he asked quietly. She shook her head slightly. "Nothing. Just, sometimes the universe has interesting ways of setting things right." He nodded, understanding completely. Sometimes what seemed like a chance encounter, a small hand offering wilted flowers, a window lowered at precisely the right moment, was actually the beginning of something far more significant. Sometimes it was the universe offering a second chance to become the person you were always meant to be.